The train's whistle screamed through the cold Montana morning, as Victoria Jane pressed her trembling hand against the soot-stained window, watching Stockton emerge from the endless prairie like a collection of scattered wooden blocks. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia with nothing but a borrowed carpetbag, a faded photograph of a stranger who claimed to want a wife, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from running toward an uncertain future because the past had become unbearable. At 23 years old, Victoria had learned that hope was a dangerous companion. It whispered sweet promises in your ear while life sharpened its knives behind your back. Her father had drunk himself to death 2 years ago, leaving her and her mother with debts that swallowed their modest home. Her mother followed him 6 months later, worn down by worry and consumption. Victoria had worked as a seamstress in a cramped factory until the foreman decided her refusal of his advances meant she was no longer needed. The streets of Philadelphia had no mercy for women alone, and when she saw the advertisement for mail-order brides seeking new lives out west, she had responded with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. The man in the photograph was named Gerald Morrison, a shopkeeper in Stockton who wrote neat, careful letters about his successful mercantile business and his desire for a wife to help him build a family. His words had been polite, even kind, but Victoria had read enough empty promises in her life to know better than to believe them. Still, Montana was 3,000 miles from Philadelphia, and that distance alone made the risk worthwhile. The train lurched to a stop, steam hissing from beneath the great iron wheels. Victoria gathered her belongings with shaking hands, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Other passengers pushed past her, eager to stretch their legs or reunite with loved ones. She descended the steps carefully, her worn boots touching the wooden platform of Stockton Station. The town sprawled before her, a collection of false-fronted buildings lining a wide dirt street. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow despite it being early June of 1884. The air smelled of pine and horse manure and something wild she could not name. Men in dusty hats and worn boots moved along the wooden sidewalks. A wagon rattled past, its wheels kicking up small clouds of dust. Victoria scanned the crowd for Gerald Morrison, clutching his photograph like a talisman. She had no idea what she would do if he was not here to meet her. The train was already preparing to continue its journey, and she had spent her last dollars on the ticket that brought her here. Miss Jane. A voice called from behind her. She turned to find a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and watery blue eyes. He looked older than his photograph, worn down in a way that spoke of harder times than his letters had suggested. His clothes were clean but threadbare, and there was something in his expression that made her stomach tighten with instinctive wariness. "Mr. Morrison," she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Indeed." He did not smile. "I trust your journey was acceptable." "It was long, but I managed." Victoria tried to keep her voice steady, to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. She had not expected warmth, exactly, but something in his cold assessment of her made her feel like livestock being evaluated at market. "You look healthy enough," Gerald said, taking her carpetbag without asking. "Can you cook? The advertisement said you had domestic skills." "I can cook, so keep house and manage accounts," Victoria replied, lifting her chin. She might be desperate, but she was not without pride or ability. "Good. I need someone who can earn their keep. The store requires constant attention, and I have no time for a wife who cannot contribute." He started walking, expecting her to follow. "We will marry tomorrow. The pastor can perform the ceremony after Sunday services." "I have already made the arrangements." Victoria hurried to keep pace with him, her exhaustion making her stumble slightly on the uneven boards of the sidewalk. "Tomorrow, but we have only just met. You came here to marry me, did you not?" Gerald glanced back at her, his expression impatient. "I see no reason to delay. I need a wife to help with the business and you need a husband to provide for you. The transaction is simple enough." Transaction. The word settled over her like a shroud. She had known this was a practical arrangement, but hearing it stated so baldly stripped away even the fragile pretense of anything more. Still, what choice did she have? She nodded mutely and followed him through the town. The mercantile was smaller than she had imagined, cramped and dim, with shelves that held sparse inventory. Gerald showed her to a tiny room at the back of the store, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand. "You will sleep here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, after we are married, you may move your things into my room upstairs." He paused, his eyes moving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I expect you understand a wife's duties." Victoria's throat went dry, but she forced herself to nod. "I understand." "Good. I will be in my office. Do not disturb me unless there is a customer." He left, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. Alone in the cramped room, Victoria sank onto the thin mattress and allowed herself one moment of pure despair. This was not the new beginning she had hoped for, but hope had always been a liar. She had traveled 3,000 miles to trade one kind of misery for another, and tomorrow she would be bound to this cold stranger for the rest of her life. She pressed her hands against her face, fighting back tears. Crying would accomplish nothing. She had survived worse than this. She would find a way to survive Gerald Morrison too. The bell above the mercantile door chimed, and Gerald's sharp voice called out, "Girl, come out here and make yourself useful." Victoria took a deep breath, smoothed her travel-stained dress, and went to begin her new life. The next morning dawned clear and bright, mocking Victoria's dark mood. Gerald had provided her with a simple gray dress, stiff and ill-fitting, and told her to be ready by 9 o'clock. The church was a modest white building at the edge of town, its steeple rising hopefully toward the vast Montana sky. Gerald barely looked at her as they walked to the church together. He nodded to a few townspeople, but did not introduce her. Victoria felt invisible, a ghost following this stranger to her own wedding. The pastor was a kindly-looking older man who seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings. "I like to counsel couples before marriage," he said gently. "Perhaps you would both like to spend some time in prayer and consideration." "That will not be necessary," Gerald said curtly. "We both know what we are about. Please proceed with the ceremony." The pastor's eyes found Victoria's, a question in their depths. She could say no. She could refuse and walk out of this church. But to where? To what? She had no money, no prospects, nowhere to go. She managed a small nod. "Very well," the pastor said, though his tone suggested he found nothing well about it. The ceremony was brief and joyless. Victoria spoke her vows in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, binding herself to a man she did not know and already feared she could never love. When Gerald placed the thin gold band on her finger, his touch was cold and impersonal. He did not kiss her when the pastor pronounced them man and wife, merely nodded with satisfaction as though he had just completed a successful business transaction. They returned to the mercantile in silence. Gerald went directly to his office, leaving Victoria to stand alone in the dim store. Mrs. Gerald Morrison now, though she felt no different than she had an hour ago. She wandered through the narrow aisles, taking inventory of the meager stock. The store was failing, she realized with growing dismay. Whatever Gerald had written about his successful business had been a lie. The shelves were half empty, the goods dusty and outdated. No wonder he needed a wife to help him. He could not afford to hire actual help. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria turned to greet her first customer. A woman entered, perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of hard work under the Montana sun. She carried a basket over one arm and wore a practical calico dress. "Good morning," the woman said warmly. "You must be Gerald's new wife. I am Martha Henderson. My husband owns the livery stable down the street." "Victoria Morrison," she replied, the name still strange on her tongue. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Martha's smile dimmed slightly as she studied Victoria's face. "Are you settling in well, dear?" "I only arrived yesterday," Victoria said carefully. "Everything is still quite new." "I imagine so." Martha paused, seeming to choose her words with care. "If you ever need anything, or if you want someone to talk to, our door is always open. It can be lonely for newcomers out here, and it helps to have friends." The unexpected kindness made Victoria's eyes sting with unshed tears. "Thank you. That is very kind." Martha purchased a few items, paying with coins she counted carefully from a worn purse. As she prepared to leave, she touched Victoria's hand gently. "I mean it, dear. Come visit any time." After Martha left, Victoria stood in the empty store, her husband's gold ring heavy on her finger, and wondered how long she could endure this life before it crushed her completely. The days that followed established a grim pattern. Victoria woke before dawn to prepare Gerald's breakfast, opened the store at 7, minded it throughout the day while Gerald conducted mysterious business in his office, prepared dinner in the evening, and endured her husband's cold, mechanical attentions at night before falling into exhausted sleep. Gerald spoke to her only to issue orders or criticisms. The eggs were too runny. The store needed better organization. She needed to smile more at customers to encourage sales. Victoria did everything he demanded and received nothing in return but the bare necessities of survival. She was fed, clothed, and sheltered, but she was not cherished or even noticed except as a useful tool. The hope she had feared to embrace withered and died, and in its place grew a numb resignation that frightened her more than despair ever had. 2 weeks after her arrival, Victoria was sweeping the store's front steps when a cowboy rode up on a magnificent bay horse. He dismounted with easy grace, tall and lean in worn denim and a dusty hat. When he climbed the steps and removed his hat, she found herself looking into the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. "Good morning, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "I am looking for Gerald Morrison. Is he available?" "He is in his office," Victoria replied, her heart doing something strange and fluttering in her chest. "May I tell him who is calling?" "Henry Powell. I have business with him regarding an outstanding debt." Victoria's stomach sank. Of course, more debts. Gerald owed money to half the town, she was beginning to realize, though he refused to discuss his finances with her. "I will fetch him," she said quietly. Henry Powell's expression softened. "You must be his new wife. Welcome to Stockton, Mrs. Morrison." "Thank you, Mr. Powell." She hurried inside before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. Gerald was furious at being interrupted, but came out when she mentioned the debt. Victoria retreated to the back of the store, but she could hear their voices rising in argument. Gerald insisted he had paid. Henry calmly produced a ledger showing otherwise. The dispute ended with Gerald promising to settle the account by the end of the month, his tone sullen and defensive. After Gerald retreated to his office, Henry approached Victoria, who was pretending to straighten a display of tinned goods. "Mrs. Morrison, I apologize for the unpleasantness. I take no pleasure in pressing a man for money he owes." "It is not your fault, Mr. Powell," Victoria said softly. "A debt is a debt." Henry studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you well, madam? You look tired." The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid her. When was the last time anyone had cared enough to ask if she was well? "I am fine," she managed, "just adjusting to my new life." Henry's jaw tightened, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been anger, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "If you ever need anything, my ranch is 5 miles north of town. The Powell Ranch. Anyone can give you directions." "That is very kind, but I am sure I will be fine." Nevertheless, he settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her. "Good day, Mrs. Morrison." Victoria watched him ride away, her heart aching with something she could not name. Henry Powell had looked at her like she was a person, not a possession or a servant. He had seen her, truly seen her, and the contrast with Gerald's indifference was almost unbearable. That night, Gerald was rougher than usual, taking out his anger over the debt on her body. Victoria lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside her, and wondered how she would survive another day, let alone a lifetime of this existence. The weeks crawled past. Henry Powell came to town every Saturday to sell cattle or purchase supplies, and he always stopped at the mercantile. Sometimes he needed goods. Sometimes he came simply to check on the debt Gerald owed him. But Victoria began to suspect that he came, at least partly, to see her. Their conversations were brief and proper, never crossing any line that would give Gerald cause for complaint. But there was something in the way Henry looked at her, a gentleness and respect that made her feel human again. He asked her opinion on things, a shocking novelty. Should he purchase the blue or the brown work shirt? Which brand of coffee did she think was better? Small questions, but they acknowledged that her thoughts mattered. Gerald noticed, of course. One Saturday evening after Henry had left, her husband grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "You are too familiar with that cowboy. A wife should show more discretion." "I barely spoke to him," Victoria protested. "I was simply helping him find what he needed in the store. You smiled at him." Gerald's fingers dug deeper into her arm. "You do not smile at me like that." "You have never given me reason to smile," Victoria said before she could stop herself. The slap came so fast she did not see it coming. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she stumbled backward, catching herself on a shelf. Gerald advanced on her, his face twisted with rage. "You will remember your place, wife. You belong to me. I own you just as I own this store and everything in it. You will not embarrass me with your behavior." Victoria pressed her hand to her burning cheek and said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was right in the eyes of the law and society. She had married him. She belonged to him now as completely as any piece of merchandise on his shelves. That night, she waited until Gerald was asleep, then slipped out of bed and went downstairs to the store. In the small mirror behind the counter, she examined her face. The bruise was already forming, a dark shadow spreading across her cheekbone. She touched it gently, wincing at the tenderness. "I will survive this," she whispered to her reflection. "I have survived everything else. I will survive him too." But for the first time since arriving in Stockton, she was not sure she believed her own words. The next Saturday, Henry Powell walked into the mercantile and stopped cold when he saw Victoria's face. The bruise had faded to an ugly yellow-green, but it was still visible despite her attempts to hide it. "Who did that to you?" His voice was low and dangerous, nothing like his usual gentle tone. "I fell," Victoria said quickly, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "I am clumsy and I tripped on the stairs." Henry moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "Mrs. Morrison, Victoria, please do not lie to me." The sound of her Christian name on his lips made her heart clench. "It does not matter," she whispered. There is nothing to be done about it. There is always something that can be done. Henry's hands clenched into fists at his sides. A man who would strike a woman is no man at all. He is a coward. He is my husband, Victoria said, the words like ashes in her mouth. I made vows before God, and he made vows too, to cherish you, to honor you. Henry's voice cracked with emotion. Victoria, you do not have to endure this. There are options. You could leave him. And go where? With what money? Victoria shook her head bitterly. I have nothing, Mr. Powell. No family, no resources, nowhere to go. Gerald knows it as well as I do. That is why he brought me here, I think. He wanted a wife who was too desperate to leave no matter how he treated her. Come to my ranch. The words burst from Henry like he could not hold them back any longer. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She is a widow who manages my household. You could stay with her. You would be safe there, respected. You would not be alone. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I cannot. The scandal would ruin both of us, and Gerald would come for me. I am his legal wife. He has every right to take me back. Then divorce him. On what grounds? The law does not care if a man is cruel to his wife, so long as he provides for her basic needs. And I have no money for lawyers, no family to support me through such proceedings. Victoria wiped her eyes angrily. I am trapped, Mr. Powell. I walked into this cage willingly, and now the door is locked behind me. Henry stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I will not let him hurt you again. You cannot be here every moment to prevent it, Victoria said sadly. And if you interfere too obviously, it will only make things worse for me. Then what can I do? The anguish in Henry's voice made her want to comfort him, though she was the one in need of comfort. Nothing, she whispered. There is nothing anyone can do. I made my choice when I answered Gerald's advertisement. I must live with the consequences. The bell above the door chimed, and they sprang apart guiltily. A customer entered, a rancher looking for rope. Victoria served him with mechanical efficiency while Henry stood to the side, his expression stormy. After the rancher left, Henry approached the counter one more time. I cannot accept this. I will not accept that you must suffer simply because you made the mistake of trusting a man who did not deserve that trust. Please, Mr. Powell, Victoria begged. Do not make this harder than it already is. Your kindness means more to me than you know, but you must let this go. For both our sakes. Henry opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He placed a few coins on the counter. For the coffee, he said roughly. Then so quietly she almost missed it. This is not over. He left before she could respond, the door swinging shut behind him with a mournful chime. That evening, Gerald interrogated her about Henry's visit, suspicious of how long he had stayed in the store. Victoria explained about the customer who had interrupted them, keeping her voice steady and her eyes downcast. Gerald seemed satisfied but warned her again about being too friendly with the cowboy. Henry Powell fancies himself a gentleman, Gerald said with a sneer. But he is just a dirt farmer playing at being important. His ranch will fail eventually, just like everyone else's. This country is too harsh for dreamers. Victoria said nothing, but privately she thought that dreamers were the only ones who could survive a place this harsh. It was the cynics like Gerald who poisoned everything they touched. Another month passed. Summer settled over Montana with blazing heat and afternoon thunderstorms that turned the streets to rivers of mud. The mercantile grew stuffier each day, and Victoria felt like she was suffocating slowly, 1 hour at a time. Henry continued to come to town every Saturday, and Gerald's debt to him remained unpaid despite repeated promises. Victoria could see the strain in Henry's eyes when he looked at her, the barely controlled fury when he noticed new bruises she could not quite hide. But he kept his distance, honoring her request not to interfere, though it clearly cost him dearly. Martha Henderson visited the store regularly, and she had become Victoria's only real friend in Stockton. She never asked directly about the bruises, but she often invited Victoria to church socials or quilting circles, any excuse to get her out of the store and away from Gerald for a few hours. Gerald usually refused to let her go, claiming he needed her help in the store, but occasionally he allowed it, perhaps sensing that complete isolation might drive his wife to desperation. It was at one of these quilting circles, held in Martha's warm kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, that Victoria finally broke down. The other women had left, but Martha asked her to stay for tea. They sat at the worn table, cups of chamomile steaming between them, and Martha said gently, "Talk to me, Victoria. Please." The kindness in her voice shattered Victoria's careful control. She began to cry, great wrenching sobs that she had held back for months. Martha came around the table and held her, rocking her like a child, murmuring wordless comfort. When the storm finally passed, Victoria found herself telling Martha everything. The lies in Gerald's letters, his cold cruelty, the way he used her body without tenderness, the violence that erupted whenever she displeased him, the trapped, hopeless feeling that grew stronger every day. Martha listened without interrupting, her face growing grimmer as the story unfolded. When Victoria finished, her friend took both her hands. "You cannot stay with him. He will kill you eventually, if not with his fists, then by breaking your spirit completely." "I have nowhere else to go," Victoria said wearily. "We have been through this, Martha. I am bound to him legally and financially." "Henry Powell would help you." Martha's eyes were knowing. "Anyone with eyes can see how he feels about you." Victoria's cheeks flushed. "Even if that were true, I cannot accept his help. The scandal would destroy both of us, and Gerald would have every legal right to force me back." "What if you were not married to Gerald anymore?" Martha asked slowly. "Divorce is nearly impossible, and I have no grounds that a court would accept." "I was not thinking of divorce." Martha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What if Gerald simply left, disappeared? Men do it all the time out here. They get restless or into debt or trouble, and they just vanish into the wilderness." Victoria stared at her friend in shock. "Martha, what are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that Gerald Morrison is not well liked in this town. He owes money to half the merchants, and everyone knows how he treats you. If he were to disappear, I do not think the sheriff would look very hard for him, and after a suitable period you would be free to make a new life for yourself." "You are talking about murder," Victoria breathed. "I am talking about survival," Martha corrected. "Your survival. But no, I would not advocate killing him, even if he deserves it. I am simply saying that if Gerald chose to leave town to escape his debts, no one would be surprised. And no one would blame you for staying here and building a new life. Gerald would never leave voluntarily. This store is all he has. Then perhaps he needs the proper motivation to go." Martha squeezed Victoria's hands. "Think about it. That is all I ask. Do not resign yourself to a lifetime of misery when there might be another way." Victoria returned to the mercantile that evening with her mind churning. She did not truly believe that Gerald could be convinced to leave, but the conversation had awakened something in her. A tiny spark of defiance, of refusal to accept her fate. It was dangerous, that spark. It could burn her badly if she was not careful. But it was also the first thing in months that made her feel truly alive. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. The following week, Henry Powell strode into the mercantile with a face like thunder and a document in his hand. "Gerald Morrison," he called out, his voice echoing through the store. "Come out here. Now." Gerald emerged from his office, his expression wary. What is the meaning of this disruption, Powell? The meaning is this. Henry slapped the document onto the counter. A legal notice of debt. You owe me $300, Morrison. I have been patient for months, but my patience is at an end. You have 1 week to pay what you owe, or I will take you to court and have the sheriff seize your assets to cover the debt. Gerald's face went white, then red with fury. You cannot do this. I told you I needed more time. You have had months of time. You have made excuse after excuse, and I have indulged you because I am a reasonable man. But I am done being reasonable with someone who has no intention of honoring his debts. Henry's eyes flicked to Victoria, who stood frozen near the back of the store. 1 week, Morrison. Gather the money or face the consequences. After Henry left, Gerald raged through the store like a wounded animal. He threw merchandise, kicked over displays, and cursed until his voice went hoarse. Victoria stayed out of his way, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that felt almost like hope. That night, Gerald drank himself into a stupor, mumbling about injustice and persecution. Victoria lay beside him in the darkness, listening to his labored breathing, and made her decision. The next morning, while Gerald was still sleeping off his drunken rage, Victoria slipped out of the mercantile before dawn and made her way to the Powell ranch. It took her nearly 2 hours to walk the 5 miles, and the sun was well up by the time she approached the ranch gates. The Powell ranch was beautiful, a sprawling property with well-maintained fences, a large barn, and a sturdy 2-story house that spoke of prosperity and care. Horses grazed in nearby pastures, and she could see cattle dotting the distant hills. This was what success looked like in Montana, built through hard work and integrity rather than the shortcuts and deceits Gerald favored. A Chinese woman in her 50s emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She studied Victoria with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are Morrison's wife," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, I am looking for Mr. Powell. Is he here?" "He is in the barn. I will fetch him." The woman paused. "I am Mrs. Chen. You are welcome here, Mrs. Morrison. Thank you, and please call me Victoria." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "Come inside, Victoria. You look exhausted. I will bring you water and get Henry." Victoria wanted to protest that she was fine, but the kindness in Mrs. Chen's voice undermined her defenses. She allowed herself to be led into the kitchen, a bright room with windows that looked out over the mountains. Mrs. Chen poured her a glass of cool water from a pitcher and disappeared. Henry arrived minutes later, his shirt dusty from barn work, his face alight with concern. "Victoria, what has happened? Did he hurt you again?" "No, not yet." Victoria set down the glass with trembling hands. "I need your help, Henry. I know I told you to stay away, but I cannot do this alone anymore. I am drowning and I need someone to throw me a rope." Henry sat down across from her, his brown eyes intense and serious. "Tell me what you need. Anything, I will do it. Help me escape him." The words came out in a rush, not through scandal or running away, but legally. "You said Gerald owes you $300. What if there was a way to use that debt to free me from this marriage? I am listening." Victoria leaned forward, the plan that had been forming in her mind all night spilling out. "Gerald has no way to pay that debt. The store is failing. He has no assets except the building and his inventory, and both are mortgaged to other creditors. When you take him to court, the sheriff will seize what little he has. He will be ruined." "That is the law," Henry agreed, "though I take no pleasure in ruining any man." "What if you offered him a way out? What if you told him you would forgive the entire debt in exchange for one thing?" "What thing?" "His agreement to leave Stockton permanently and grant me a divorce on grounds of abandonment." Henry sat back, his eyes widening. You want me to essentially buy your freedom from him. Yes. He cares nothing for me except as unpaid labor. If you make it clear that the alternative is complete financial ruin and possible jail time for fraud, I think he would take the deal. He could go to California or Oregon or anywhere else and start over, without the burden of a wife he never wanted anyway. And if he agrees, you would be free after the abandonment waiting period. Henry's voice was rough with emotion. Free to make your own choices about your life. Yes. Victoria met his eyes steadily. I know what you are risking by helping me. I know this could damage your reputation. But I am asking anyway because I have no one else to turn to, and because I think you are the kind of man who would risk his reputation to do what is right. Henry reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle and warm. I would risk far more than my reputation for you, Victoria. I would risk everything. Her breath caught at the intensity in his voice, at the unmistakable emotion blazing in his eyes. Henry. I am in love with you, he said simply. I have been since the first moment I saw you standing on those mercantile steps, looking so lost and brave at the same time. I know I have no right to speak of such things while you are still married, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Victoria, and I will do whatever it takes to help you be free. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of despair. I feel the same way, she whispered. I tried not to. I tried to ignore it and push it away because it was impossible and wrong, but I cannot stop my heart from recognizing yours. Henry lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. Then let us make the impossible possible. Let us find a way to build the life we both deserve. They spent the next hour planning carefully. Henry would present the offer to Gerald in front of witnesses, making it a formal business proposition. If Gerald accepted, Henry would have his lawyer draw up documents releasing Gerald from the debt in exchange for Gerald's legal agreement to leave Montana and not contest a divorce filing based on abandonment. It was not foolproof, but it had a chance of working. What if he refuses? Victoria asked. Then I proceed with the court case and let the chips fall where they may, but I think he will accept. Men like Gerald are ultimately cowards. When faced with real consequences for their actions, they choose the path of least resistance. Victoria nodded slowly. When will you make the offer? Tomorrow. In front of the sheriff and my lawyer, so everything is documented and legal. Can you hold on one more day, Victoria? I have held on this long. I can manage one more day. She stood to leave. I should get back before Gerald wakes and realizes I am gone. Henry insisted on driving her back to town in his wagon, though he left her a block from the mercantile to avoid arousing Gerald's suspicions. Before she climbed down, he caught her hand one more time. Whatever happens, know this. You are not alone anymore. You have me, and I will not fail you. Victoria nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She walked the final block to the mercantile with her head high, that dangerous spark of hope burning brighter in her chest. Gerald was awake when she entered, hungover and foul-tempered. Where have you been? Walking. I needed fresh air. It was not even a lie. Gerald grunted and shuffled to his office without further questions. Victoria went about her morning routine, preparing breakfast and opening the store, but her mind was elsewhere, counting down the hours until Henry would make his offer. The next afternoon, Henry arrived with Sheriff Tom Lawson and a thin man carrying a leather satchel whom Henry introduced as his lawyer, Mr. Graves. Gerald emerged from his office, his face darkening when he saw the assembled group. "What is this?" he demanded. "This is a formal business meeting regarding your outstanding debt to me," Henry said calmly. "I have asked the sheriff and my attorney to witness what I am about to propose. Gerald's eyes darted between the three men like a trapped animal seeking escape. "I told you I would pay. I just need more time." "No more time, Morrison, but I am prepared to offer you an alternative to court proceedings." Henry pulled out a document. "I will forgive your entire debt to me, and I will provide you with an additional $200 in cash in exchange for two things. First, you will sign over the deed to this mercantile to your wife, Victoria Morrison, as her sole property. Second, you will leave Montana Territory permanently and sign a legal document agreeing not to contest any divorce proceedings she may file against you on grounds of abandonment." The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald stared at Henry as if he had sprouted a second head. "You want me to give up my business and my wife? I want you to free a woman you have no love for and give her the means to support herself. In exchange, you walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else and no legal consequences for your debts. This is insane. Why would you do this?" Gerald's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. "You want her for yourself. This is about stealing another man's wife. This is about offering you a way out of a situation that will otherwise end in your complete ruin," Henry corrected coldly. "The sheriff is prepared to arrest you for fraud if we proceed to court. Several of your other creditors have filed complaints about your business practices. You can take this deal and leave with your freedom and a stake to start over, or you can refuse and face criminal charges." Sheriff Lawson nodded grimly. "It is true, Morrison. I have been building a case against you for weeks. Mr. Powell's offer is more generous than you deserve." Gerald's face cycled through rage, fear, and calculation. Victoria watched from behind the counter, hardly daring to breathe. Everything depended on what her husband decided in the next few minutes. "How do I know you will honor this agreement?" Gerald finally asked. "How do I know this is not some trick?" Mr. Graves stepped forward. "I have drawn up a contract that all parties will sign. The money will be held in escrow until you have left the territory and can prove that you have established residence elsewhere. Everything will be legal and binding. And if I refuse, then I will see you in court, and I will pursue every legal remedy available to me," Henry said flatly, "including criminal charges for the fraudulent letters you sent to Philadelphia to lure your wife here under false pretenses. I have obtained copies of those letters, Morrison. You claimed to own a successful business free and clear of debt. That was a lie. Legally speaking, you obtained your wife through fraud, which gives her grounds for annulment on top of everything else." Victoria's heart leaped. She had not known Henry had gone to such lengths to build a case. Gerald's shoulders slumped in defeat. He was cornered and he knew it. "Fine," he said bitterly. "I will take your damned deal. This store is worthless anyway, and she is more trouble than she is worth. Then we have an agreement." Mr. Graves produced the contracts, and for the next hour, papers were signed and witnessed. Gerald signed over the mercantile deed to Victoria. He signed an agreement not to contest divorce proceedings. He signed an acknowledgement of his debts and their forgiveness. Each signature brought Victoria closer to freedom. When it was done, Mr. Graves placed $200 in cash on the counter. "This is yours, Morrison, once you have left Montana Territory. I will hold the funds until I receive proof that you have established residence in another state. You have 1 week to vacate the premises." Gerald grabbed the money and stuffed it into his pocket. He looked at Victoria with something like hatred. "I hope you are happy. I hope he makes you miserable." "You already did that," Victoria said quietly. "Nothing he could do would be worse than what I have endured with you." Gerald stormed upstairs to pack his belongings. The sheriff stayed to ensure there was no violence, while Henry and Mr. Graves reviewed the documents with Victoria. "This mercantile is yours now," Mr. Graves explained. the building and all inventory. There are still some debts against it to other creditors, but they are manageable if you can build the business back up. I can manage it, Victoria said, her voice stronger than she had heard it in months. I know how to run a store and I know what this town needs. Henry smiled at her, pride shining in his eyes. I have no doubt of that. Within 3 days, Gerald Morrison left Stockton. Victoria stood in the doorway of her mercantile, watching him ride out of town on a hired horse with his belongings in a battered trunk strapped behind the saddle. He did not look back. She felt nothing but relief. The divorce would take time, months of legal proceedings and waiting periods, but it was in motion. Victoria threw herself into rebuilding the mercantile with a passion that surprised even herself. She cleared out the old, dusty inventory and replaced it with goods she knew the townspeople actually needed. She extended credit to struggling families and made fair deals with local suppliers. Slowly, the business began to turn around. Henry was there every step of the way, though he was careful to maintain propriety. He helped her move heavy crates, introduced her to reliable wholesalers, and advised her on business matters. But he never stayed past dark, and he never touched her beyond the occasional brush of hands. They both knew they had to wait until the divorce was final before they could openly court, no matter how difficult that waiting might be. Martha Henderson and Mrs. Chen became Victoria's closest friends and fiercest supporters. They helped her redecorate the living quarters above the store, transforming them from Gerald's dark, oppressive rooms into a bright, welcoming home. They brought her to church and social events, helping her establish herself as a respected businesswoman in Stockton rather than just Morrison's abandoned wife. The months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and Victoria experienced her first Montana snowfall, standing in her doorway and watching fat white flakes transform the town into something beautiful and pure. She had never felt so free, despite the hard work and long hours. She was building something that belonged to her alone, and that knowledge was sweeter than any luxury. Spring came again, and with it, the final divorce decree. Victoria stood in the courthouse with Henry and Mr. Graves, listening to the judge declare that her marriage to Gerald Morrison was officially dissolved. She was Victoria Jane again, no longer Morrison's wife, free to make her own choices and write her own story. Henry walked her home through the warm spring sunshine, and when they reached the mercantile, he took her hand. "I have been patient for a year," he said softly. "I have waited and respected the proprieties and given you time to heal, but I cannot wait any longer to ask you this. Victoria Jane, I love you with everything I am. Would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife?" Victoria felt tears sting her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, Henry Powell. Yes to courting, yes to being your wife, yes to everything. I love you too, and I think I have been waiting my whole life for you." Henry pulled her into his arms right there on the main street of Stockton and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the past year. Victoria melted into him, finally allowing herself to embrace the hope she had been so afraid of for so long. This was real. This was solid. This was a man who had proven his faithfulness and his love through actions as well as words. Their courtship was the talk of Stockton, but it was talk filled with approval and happiness. Everyone had seen how Gerald treated Victoria, and everyone had witnessed Henry's patience and devotion. When Henry proposed 3 months later, presenting her with a ring that had belonged to his mother, the whole town celebrated. They were married in the same white church where Victoria had wed Gerald, but this ceremony was everything that one had not been. The church was filled with friends and well-wishers. Martha stood up with Victoria as her matron of honor. Mrs. Chen wept openly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The pastor smiled throughout the service, clearly delighted to be marrying two people who so obviously loved each other. When Henry placed the ring on Victoria's finger, his hands were steady and his eyes were full of love. When he kissed her as his wife, it was gentle and reverent and full of promise. Victoria felt something inside her, some last broken piece, finally begin to heal. They honeymooned at the ranch, which would now be Victoria's home. Mrs. Chen had prepared the master bedroom with fresh flowers and turned-down sheets. Henry carried Victoria over the threshold, and when he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "I promise you," he said solemnly, "I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving that you were right to believe in me. You were right to hope again. I will never give you cause to regret this." "I know," Victoria whispered. "You have already proven it, Henry. You have given me back myself. You have given me a future I never dreamed was possible." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, everything that Victoria's experiences with Gerald had not been. Henry took his time, worshipping her body with gentle hands and whispered endearments. He made her feel cherished and desired and beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the soft bed, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the wall. "I never thought I could feel this way," Victoria confessed. "Safe and happy and hopeful all at once. After everything that happened, I thought I was broken forever." "You were never broken," Henry said firmly. "You were bent and battered and nearly crushed, but you survived. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Victoria Powell." Victoria Powell. Her new name, chosen freely this time, given with love. She smiled in the darkness and snuggled closer to her husband, her partner, her love. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch required hard work and long hours. There were droughts and harsh winters and cattle lost to disease. The mercantile had its ups and downs as the local economy fluctuated. But Victoria and Henry faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. They had their first child 2 years after their wedding, a boy they named James after Henry's father. Henry was present for the birth, holding Victoria's hand through every contraction, ignoring the doctor's suggestion that he wait outside as was customary. When James was finally born, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Henry wept with joy. "Thank you," he whispered to Victoria, pressing his forehead to hers. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." Victoria was too exhausted to do more than smile, but her heart was full to bursting. This was what family was supposed to feel like. This was what love looked like. 2 years later came twins, a boy and a girl they named David and Rose. The house filled with noise and laughter and chaos. Mrs. Chen proved to be a devoted grandmother figure, spoiling the children shamelessly while pretending to be stern. Martha Henderson's children played with the Powell children, and the two families grew as close as blood relations. Victoria kept the mercantile running, though she hired help to manage it on days when she was needed at the ranch. She became known as one of the shrewdest businesswomen in Montana, respected for her fair dealing and her kindness to those in need. She never forgot what it was like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure to extend credit to those who truly needed it, just as Henry had extended help to her when she needed it most. Henry built the ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. His cattle were sought after for their quality, and his horses were known for their strength and temperament. But he never let business consume him the way it consumed so many men. His family always came first. He made time to teach his sons to ride and to read his daughter stories before bed. He made time to sit with Victoria on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. You ever think about those early days? Victoria asked one evening when the children were in bed, and they had the world to themselves for a few precious hours. "About how close I came to never finding this. All the time," Henry admitted. "I think about walking into that mercantile and seeing you there, so sad and so brave. I think about falling in love with you when I had no right to do so. I think about how easily I might have missed you if I had chosen a different day to come to town, or if you had arrived a week earlier or later. But you did not miss me. You found me, or I found you, or we found each other." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to be so afraid to hope for anything good. Gerald taught me that hope was dangerous, that it only led to disappointment. But you taught me something different. What did I teach you? That hope is not about being certain everything will work out perfectly. It is about believing that good things are possible, even after terrible things have happened. It is about having the courage to reach for happiness even when you are not sure you will catch it." Victoria lifted her head to look at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. "You gave me every reason to believe again, Henry, in love, in goodness, in the future. You gave me myself back." Henry kissed her softly, a kiss that still made her heart race even after years of marriage. "You gave me those things too, sweetheart. You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a family and a future I never knew I wanted until I met you." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast Montana sky with brilliant light. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. In town, the mercantile stood ready for another day of honest business. On the ranch, cattle grazed and horses dozed in their stalls. Everything Victoria had built, everything they had built together, solid and real and good. She thought briefly of Gerald Morrison and wondered what had become of him. She had heard through the occasional traveler that he had ended up in San Francisco, running a saloon of questionable repute. The news had sparked no emotion in her beyond a vague pity. That part of her life felt like it had happened to someone else, a different Victoria who had not yet learned that she was strong enough to survive anything. "I am grateful," Victoria said softly, "for all of it, even the hard parts. Because everything I went through led me here to you, to this life. I would not change any of it if it meant losing what we have now." "Neither would I," Henry agreed. "Every choice, every hardship, every moment of doubt was worth it to end up here with you." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. James grew tall and serious, with his father's steady nature and his mother's business sense. David was the wild one, always seeking adventure, always testing boundaries. Rose was clever and determined, already showing signs that she would follow in her mother's footsteps as a businesswoman. More children followed, another daughter named Margaret, and then finally a late surprise, a son they named Thomas. The house rang with laughter and arguments and the constant noise of a large, happy family. Henry built an addition onto the house to accommodate everyone, and Victoria expanded the mercantile to include a small restaurant where Mrs. Chen served her amazing Chinese cooking alongside traditional American fare. Stockton grew and changed around them. The railroad brought more settlers. The town got a proper school, and Victoria served on the school board, fighting to ensure that all children, regardless of their family's financial situation, had access to education. She quietly paid tuition for children whose families could not afford it, never seeking recognition or thanks. Henry became a respected voice in territorial politics, though he refused to run for office himself. He preferred to influence things from behind the scenes, using his reputation and resources to support causes he believed in. When Montana became a state in 1889, He and Victoria attended the celebration in Helena, proud to be part of this new chapter in the region's history. Their 20th wedding anniversary fell on a perfect spring day. The children planned a surprise party with help from Mrs. Chen and Martha Henderson. When Henry and Victoria arrived home from a rare day spent alone together in town, they found the house and yard filled with friends and family. "Surprise!" the children shouted, and Victoria burst into tears of happiness. There was a feast, music, and dancing. James had carved a beautiful wooden plaque commemorating their anniversary. David and Rose performed a silly play about their parents' courtship that had everyone laughing. Margaret played the piano while Thomas sang, his clear young voice bringing more tears to Victoria's eyes. As the sun set and the party wound down, Henry led Victoria away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the ranch. 20 years, he marveled. It has gone by so fast. And so slow, Victoria countered. I feel like I have lived 3 lifetimes, the terrible one with Gerald, the waiting time when I was rebuilding myself, and this one with you, which has been longer and fuller than the other 2 combined. Here is to 20 more, Henry said, raising an imaginary glass, and 20 after that, and as many more as God grants us. I will take every single one, Victoria promised. I will never stop being grateful for this life, Henry. Never. They stood together as the stars emerged, just as they had done countless times over the years. But this time, their children gradually joined them one by one, until the whole family stood together under the vast Montana sky. James came first, now a young man of 18, already courting Martha Henderson's daughter. David and Rose came next, squabbling as always but clearly devoted to each other. Margaret arrived with Thomas in tow, the 2 youngest still small enough to hold hands without embarrassment. Mrs. Chen appeared with Martha, the 2 women who had become Victoria's family when she had none of her own blood left. They all stood together, this patchwork family built on love and loyalty and second chances. Victoria looked around at all these faces she cherished and felt her heart might burst from the sheer abundance of blessing in her life. "Thank you," she said to all of them. "Thank you for being my family. Thank you for filling my life with so much love." "We love you too, Mama," Rose said, and the others echoed her sentiment. Henry pulled Victoria close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. This was what hope looked like when it was fulfilled beyond your wildest dreams. This was what faith looked like when it was rewarded with steady, patient love. This was what courage looked like when it carried you through darkness into brilliant light. Victoria had been so afraid to hope when she first came to Stockton, broken and desperate and certain that life held nothing good for her. But Henry Powell had given her every reason to believe again. He had shown her through his actions that love could be kind, that men could be honorable, that promises could be kept. He had waited for her, fought for her, and built a life with her that exceeded anything she had dared to imagine, and she had given him the same things in return. She had trusted him when trust was the hardest thing in the world. She had believed in their future when she had every reason to doubt. She had worked beside him to build not just a ranch or a business, but a true partnership based on mutual respect and deep, abiding love. The children eventually drifted back toward the house, drawn by Mrs. Chen's promise of cake and ice cream. Martha followed them, shepherding the younger ones with practiced ease. Henry and Victoria remained alone under the stars, reluctant to let this perfect moment end. "What are you thinking?" Henry asked, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman in Montana," Victoria said simply. "Maybe in the whole world." "I am the lucky one," Henry countered. "I am the one who got to love you, to be loved by you, to watch you transform from that frightened girl on the mercantile steps into the magnificent woman you are now." "I was always this woman," Victoria said. "I just forgot for a while. You helped me remember." They walked slowly back toward the house, arms wrapped around each other, in no hurry to rejoin the party. The windows glowed with warm yellow light, and they could hear laughter and music spilling out into the night. Their home, their family, their life. Victoria thought again of that day she arrived in Stockton, alone and terrified and hopeless. She thought of the photograph of a stranger she had clutched in her hand, the lie that had brought her to Montana. If someone had told her then that one day she would stand here, surrounded by love and joy and children and friends, she would never have believed them. The distance between that Victoria and this one seemed impossible to cross, but she had crossed it. With Henry's help, and with her own courage and strength, she had crossed that impossible distance. She had survived, and then she had thrived, and then she had built something beautiful from the ashes of her worst nightmares. "I love you, Henry Powell," she said, stopping at the porch steps to look up at her husband in the starlight. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life, and it still will not be enough to repay you for everything you have given me." "You owe me nothing," Henry said, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better. You made me whole. You gave me a reason to be the man I always wanted to be." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 20 years of love and devotion and unshakable commitment. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Victoria said, taking his hand. "Our family is waiting for us." They climbed the porch steps together and went inside, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner of their home. The party continued late into the night, full of stories and laughter and joy. The children begged for tales of the old days, and Henry and Victoria obliged, editing out the darkest parts, but giving them a sense of the journey that had brought their parents together. When the last guest had gone home and the children were finally in bed, exhausted from the celebration, Henry and Victoria climbed the stairs to their bedroom. They got ready for bed with the comfortable familiarity of 20 years of marriage, moving around each other with easy grace. In bed, Victoria curled into Henry's arms, her favorite place in the world. "Thank you for today, for every day. Thank you for saying yes to me all those years ago," Henry murmured, already half asleep. "For taking a chance on a cowboy who loved you when he had no right to." "You had every right," Victoria whispered, "and I had every reason to believe in you." She lay awake a little longer after Henry's breathing deepened into sleep, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness. The wind whispered through the pine trees. One of the horses whinnied softly in the barn. These were the sounds of home, of safety, of a life well lived and well loved. Victoria sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force in the universe had brought her to this place, to this man, to this beautiful, impossible life she had built from nothing but hope and courage and love. She had been afraid to hope when she stepped off that train in Stockton so many years ago. Hope had hurt her too many times before. But Henry Powell had given her every reason to believe again, and that belief had transformed everything. Victoria fell asleep smiling, secure in the arms of the man who had saved her by showing her she could save herself, who had loved her by teaching her she was worthy of love, who had given her a future by believing in it when she could not. And in the morning, she would wake to another day in this precious life, another day to love and be loved, another day to watch their children grow and their ranch prosper and their love deepen even further. The mail-order bride who had been afraid to hope had found everything she needed in the faithful cowboy who never stopped believing in her. Together, they had built a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of patience and faith, and the kind of love that heals all wounds. Their story was not over, but it had reached its happily ever after, and that was the best ending of all.